Welcome back to Sport Media and Tech. I am Keel Blake, Dr. Jeff Porter, Mark Hodgkin, and I. This episode spend time with three professionals who specialize in media activations, technology, and logistics. We discuss the impact COVID-19 has had on their organizations, the innovation that it's driven, and what the new normal looks like today. Tiffany Hollins, she's a Global Partnerships and Activations Manager at UFC. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, doing well.
Fantastic.
We also have Lizzie Seedhouse, the Senior Vice President of Digital for Emerging Tech and Strategy with the USL. How are you doing, Lizzie?
Great. Thank you, Keel, and appreciate you having me on today.
Last but not least, we have Megan McLean. She's a local here in Orlando for some of our students that will be watching. She's SVP of Sports at the 2022 Special Olympic Games. So how are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me today.
Hey, it's our pleasure. So the first question that we'd like to ask all of you is just, how did you get your start in sports, tech, media, or just the industry as a whole? Like, give us your whole background.
Well, for me, it was kind of a windy, weird road into sports. I grew up playing sports. My parents are huge sports lovers. They played in high school and college and those types of things. And in college, I always knew I wanted to be in entertainment and sports, but I didn't really know of sports jobs at the time. I just kind of thought you had your athletes, you had your broadcasters, that type of thing. So I ended up in the entertainment side for a while. And then, but I knew my background was also marketing. So I worked for a lot of marketing companies, a lot of firms, and I ended up at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway, which was my first real sports job. And it's kind of one of those things, once you get your foot in the door to one sports job, you can kind of lead you to other things. So I'm currently working for the UFC right now as the Global Partnerships Activation Manager.
Yeah, and I got my start in technology 10 years ago, working for a startup company based out of Tampa. We did SEO, SEM, affiliate marketing. We started building out a SaaS company, and I did that for 5 years and loved it. Got my hands really dirty in every aspect of the business. And I really like building things, and creating something from scratch. So I'm really attuned to the startup lifestyle. And then I left that job, took a short break, and found myself at the USL as their director of digital and managing their websites. And have now been there for almost 5 years, coming up on, working with a really great team. And I love it. I don't think I would ever leave sports now and there, but I just really enjoy the technology aspect too, and how it can reach people, outside your market.
And for me, I think like a lot of people who are in the sports industry, the love for sports started really young. I played sports my whole life, played basketball through college, and entered college with the major of sport management and with the goal of working in sports in that capacity. And I actually, halfway through college, had the opportunity with one of my teammates who has a sibling with pretty severe disabilities. I had the opportunity to volunteer and spend some time at her adult day training center. And actually one experience there led me to go to my academic advisor the following week and shift my focus to special education. So just after that one day of interacting with those individuals, I decided I'm going to go teach. I need to help this population, and I'm going to be a special educator. Went through the rest of college, got to student teaching, and I always say now they should have you do that first. Because it was that which happened at the end that made me realize that it probably wasn't for me. So I ended up kind of leaning back into sports, and I worked in the WNBA for the team in Chicago for a little while. And through that experience, came into contact with a lot of people who have made a career in Special Olympics, which is something to that point that I hadn't considered. But it was sort of just this moment where both of my passions were just colliding in front of me. And I realized that could be a career. So that brought me to Special Olympics Florida, where I was for 6 years before joining the Games Organizing Committee for the USA Games.
What we want to start to dive into is, what is your role at your organization and what do you do for your organization?
Okay, well, I work for UFC. I'm the Global Partnerships Activation Manager. Funny enough, I started on March 2nd. Right before the pandemic. So I was in the office like a total of probably 3 days before I started to work from home. So in my role, I'm an account manager, but you handle so many other things. So I work with PR, I work with athlete relations, I will be working with ticketing again once we get people back in the arena. Yeah, it's just, you're kind of hands-on. So you're managing the brands from all aspects. So if they need a fighter for a photo shoot, I'm working on that. If I need to organize some kind of social media post, I work with the social team, newsletters, you name it. So pretty much anything that can give the brands exposure, I'm working with all aspects of our team to make sure that happens.
And at the USL, I'm the Senior Vice President of Digital, Emerging Tech and Strategy. So I have my hands in a lot of pies, but to boil it down, I oversee all the technology for the league, right? From websites to apps and how those get used at the league level, and then also providing technological solutions for our clubs, right? And how to help them take digital and tools like that from an expense into a revenue driver. I also oversee our social media and creative team. So it's a lot of distribution on my end. And then in my spare time, I work on the sports betting strategy for the USL and how that can be a new revenue stream for both our business and the clubs as well.
And as the Senior Vice President of Sports for the USA Games, I'll be responsible for overseeing a team that will produce sporting events for 4,000 athletes across 20 sports. So that's covering all the planning, execution, and production of those sports, really from A to Z. So from venue development through recruiting officials, scheduling, making sure the athletes are registered, and then also their awards experience. So basically from the minute one of these athletes touches down in Orlando until they leave, at any point that they are engaging with something sport or competition related, my team will oversee that experience and really try to give the athletes a true Olympic championship feel throughout their whole time in Orlando.
Excellent. You know, one of the things we want to talk about today was really how organizations have been shifting from events to more of a focus on media. Obviously this year, especially, there's been such a change in what all of us have done, you know, in sports and entertainment space. But I guess I'd like to hear from each of you, you know, what does the change look like? How has it impacted your day to day? What's been changing kind of behind the scenes?
So for me, this question is a little tricky because I literally started right at the pandemic. So this is all I know. But I can say that the operations behind the scenes, it is such a well-oiled machine. It seems like most of the people that work at the UFC have been there for years. So they all know each other very well. They know how to coordinate things very well. It's very fast paced. So I know the pandemic is huge, but I don't feel like it affected them that much. They just knew that there was an issue and then they had to solve it. And so it was just quick for them. So no real issues on their side. It was just done very quickly, very smoothly. So yeah, so I don't know what it was like before the pandemic, but it's been a well-oiled machine since.
For me at the USL, I think, you know, we got to March 12th, which was about a week into our season, played about 17 games and had to put the brakes on completely and pause the season without an end date or a kickoff date in sight for what we would do next. So we strongly had to turn to media at that time, and we have a big media partner with ESPN that, you know, we have to kind of fulfill that partnership and provide them content. So we had to make some really quick decisions and stitch some things together. We ended up hosting an esports tournament on ESPN. We played Rocket League, and we had to figure out what to do to keep our fans engaged during this time that was completely open-ended when this happened in March, and we needed to activate our sponsors at our clubs along with activating our players too to keep it relevant. So we ran a 4 weeks E-Cup tournament playing Rocket League on ESPN. And then we'd finish that at the end of April and still no idea when we would kick off again. So we pivoted again back into a second E-Cup of a FIFA tournament, which again had our players and fans play against each other. And we streamed that on Twitch just to kind of keep the momentum going and keep USL relevant in a time where you need a distraction from the social injustice and the pandemic and all the turmoil that the country was going through. So now we're back in season where we've pivoted, or we've stayed true to our course of like, we're media centric as the league. We don't have any events of our own per se, like it's our club's events and we help support them. But yeah, I think the hardest time and maybe the most fruitful and creative time we've had this year was during that downtime when there was no games.
Yeah, and in preparing for the USA Games right now, being 20 months out and over the past several months, would be the time that we're trying to get people excited about the event. And when I say people, that means sponsors, our athletes, the coaches who support them, the state programs, the state Special Olympics programs that are supporting them. So what that would normally look like is bringing people to the venues and bringing them to countdown events and kickoff events. To get them excited and build some of that momentum. And obviously for the past several months, we haven't been able to do that. So we've been doing a lot virtually, as everyone has, to kind of build that excitement and really have people feel like they're getting the same experience as if they were on the ground here in Orlando. And then the other piece of it operationally is, for my team right now, is when we would be building the venue. And it's really hard to determine where tents and tables and chairs and signs are going to be placed when you can't physically be at the venue. A few people on my team benefit from having worked at these venues before, but I have some people who have joined the team who have never, they're planning an event in a venue that they've never stepped foot in, have never seen. So Google Earth has been our best friend. We stare at that a lot, and virtual tours, and just kind of having the patience to lay the best plans that we can right now, and hope that as soon as the NBA is finished, we can get our feet on the ground at Wide World of Sports, where we will host the majority of our event.
Each of you has touched on logistics behind your roles and the teams that support each other and just some of the operations. And so I'm just curious if we could dive in just a little more to, how are operations changing right now while you're working remote? What are some of the positives that you're seeing in terms of creativity and ingenuity and innovation? And then what are some of the challenges that you're seeing as well?
I think for me, just the challenges are probably just learning this new role on the job. So instead of, being in the office, those first couple of months or so on a new job, you have your colleagues right there next to you, so you can ask them a simple question, or they can physically show you how to do something, or you can meet new people. So I didn't really have that aspect. So it's a lot of cold calling new colleagues, or just emailing them and introducing yourself, and just a lot of, virtual meetings that are happening now. But I think the great thing about having to work from home is that it's really forced me to pick up the job quicker. So, instead of me just relying on turning to a coworker next door to me, I actually try to solve it first on my own before I have to make that extra effort to reach out to someone. So I think that's been helpful. And then I think just logistically, it's just kept us a lot safer to be home. I mean, our office is open now, so we do have the option to go in. So I do go in when I really need to, but I think it's helped out a lot to work from home at the moment.
For me at the USL, when season paused in March, we had the big question of what is everyone's job? My team's very fan facing. We create content, graphics, video, social media. We run websites and apps, and fans aren't engaging with those things because they've got other things going on, and we don't have our bread and butter content of games to provide extra content. So we had to do a lot of soul searching and digging deep in terms of what value can we provide during this time, which forced us to be really creative. And I think it was the biggest positive that's probably come out of 2020 is what we can do when we're backed into a corner. Otherwise, on logistics, I think being the digital team at USL, we've proven we can work from home. That's easy, but I think hopefully as a company and holistically, it changes the way that companies do business. There can be less meetings or more phone calls and more things done via email. And I think it will ease up a lot more people's time moving forward, at least the USL, because there's this comfort of people can work from home. They can be flexible. I have my team in all over the country right now, in California, in Philadelphia, in Michigan, and they're all doing their job perfectly fine. So I'm hoping there'll be, more flexibility in companies ongoing that, you can be relied on to do your job remotely.
Yeah, and for us here in Orlando, we, as soon as the pandemic hit, went work from home for probably about 3.5 months. But we do have that startup feel. So when all that was happening, there were only 5 employees. And being that small, it's a little bit easier to come back safely. So we've been back in the office on a voluntary basis for the past few months now. And some people choose to stay home and work from home and have that option just based on personal preference. But I think the way that structure worked is when we were forced to all be at home, a lot of people were new to Special Olympics as an organization. So it was really beneficial to have uninterrupted time to get educated on what the organization means, what we do, and what these games are and what's the purpose of our committee. And then right when we shifted back to having some face time together in the office, it was actually really good timing because people had educated themselves and were ready to start collaborating. We're ready to start reaching out to other departments and having conversations about how we can produce this event. And I think that we're learning quickly that there's a really big benefit to the organic conversations that happen just by overhearing. And we have sort of an open concept here. So two people might be speaking and it triggers something in someone else's mind. And that goes down a conversation that becomes, it changes the way we're planning. And it just kind of came because we're all in the same space together. So we're just being really sensitive to respecting people's space and staying safe. And there's a few people who have personal reasons why they are completely working from home. So we're in that hybrid mode right now as well. But I think we've really been able to benefit from both.
You guys have touched on, sorry, you ladies have touched on this a little bit. I really want to kind of dive a bit more into this conversation of activations, right? So I've worked with IMG and WME, and I know how event activations operate. That entire process and that entire kind of staple of how things used to do is gone out the window. So in your roles, how have event operations changed, or how do you see them changing post-COVID when we get back to any kind of normalcy?
Well, for our event activations, before we used to have actual booths outside so fans could interact with specific partners where they could go there, win prizes, learn about the brand's product, or there would be a meet and greet with the athletes or some type of like activation like that, but we can't do any of that right now. So a lot of the beginning of this pandemic, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out replacements for that. So a lot of stuff has gone digital at this point. So like instead of a fighter meet and greet in person, we're doing virtual Q&As where they might do something on their Instagram Live or they do something on Twitter now. So that's like the fans can still have that interaction. They can ask questions. And sometimes it's even a little better because they don't have to stand in line for hours to wait to actually ask a question. They can get that question asked by one of the athletes now. So that's one of the main things that we've been seeing. For activations for the partners, we're just trying to incorporate them into additional things like we can. So we have a UFC embedded show that we put on our YouTube channel. So we try to like put our partners' logos on those sometimes. So just any type of way where we can still make sure they're getting that type of exposure. But it's, yeah, at this point, it's mostly all digital right now.
Yeah, I think we're in a really unique situation that we wouldn't normally have a lot of activations happening right now. So we're able to, as a team, sit and watch what other people are doing and learn from how they're shifting to digital and how they're supporting their sponsors and their supporters digitally. And I think that we would all agree that a lot of this stuff is probably going to stick even when it doesn't have to. So when things go back to so-called normal, we probably will carry through some of these new creative ways that we're engaging our fans and our sponsors. So we're sort of able to just pay really close attention to what other people are doing and kind of be creative with how we might be able to use that moving forward. So we, unlike most sports and events organizations, have a lot of time. So we're continuing our planning, obviously fully aware that COVID is here and we're in a pandemic and that nobody knows what things will look like in 20 months. But we're sort of able to just continue to plan as if things will be a lot better and let other organizations and other companies try things and find out good policies and procedures. And then we'll be able to kind of pick apart what will work for us if we have to shift and be a little bit more focused on pandemic planning.
You made some good points about how things that, we found during this time might continue on. I'd like to go a little bit deeper even into that. It doesn't have to be about partner activations or anything like that, but as far as digital strategy, digital trends that you've seen, what's kind of the next, what's the next frontier in that space? I mean, what do you expect to see more of, maybe when we do get back to that normal, whenever that is? I think we all understand it'll get back to something like normal at some point. but I'd be curious what you'll be looking out for in the digital space.
I think for us, like Megan just mentioned, I think we'll probably stick to doing more of these virtual Q&As, that type of thing. They seem to be doing very well. I would like to see like more virtual reality stuff to see how they can kind of incorporate that. I tried this virtual reality headset like a year ago for the NBA, and it was amazing. I felt like I was actually in the game or in the locker room with the team, so it was really cool. So I would like to hopefully see something like that maybe incorporated in the sports world more, where we can just actually really feel like we're at the event. So that would be pretty cool.
I think looking outside the USL, you have to take note of 5G, right? And being in stadiums and Verizon and NHL just doing that deal last week and what that looks like for sports fans and that engagement in stadium. And then beyond that, how does sports betting integrate into media and technology moving forward? And how does that get activated? And we'll start to see some of the major leagues kind of come in and show off their muscle, integrate betting odds. We see it on ESPN right now. We saw it with the XFL, right, of how they bring that into the realm of sports and kind of create that betting behavior. So I think that's going to be huge on the horizon for the next couple of years as that market starts to boom and as more states legislate legal sports betting. I think you're going to see a big shift in fan behavior and more attention and eyeballs on sport.
And I really think this shift to focusing on digital is going to allow us to reach more athletes and include more athletes in this USA Games experience, because it only happens every 4 years. And the 4,000 athletes that will come here in June of 2022 is a tiny fraction of the number of athletes that exist within Special Olympics across our country and across North America. So we're brainstorming ways to use some of these new digital and creative ideas to include these athletes, whether they are able to stream events or be fans at the events, and make them feel included, because inclusion is a huge part of our mission. So while we may only be able to have 4,000 athletes here, we could include hundreds of thousands of athletes in this event. And the other piece is just a shift to esports. Esports has kind of been looming in the background in Special Olympics, and some people are really, really supportive because it's obviously really popular right now. And can be really competitive. But we also have a really big focus on health and organization. So some people are on the other side saying we need these athletes to be up and moving. Well, this has kind of tipped that into the side of esports, because doing something is better than doing nothing. So we'll include esports in our USA Games and potentially be able to leverage technology to bring thousands of athletes into our actual competition through that. So I think it's just really things that were going to happen anyway. This has just sped everything up, and people are forced to be really creative and innovative right now. And I think it's going to end up having a really, really positive impact on the industry.
Yeah. So, each of your organizations serves, fans and followers nationally, but then also globally in certain areas. So I'm curious on how that's evolving for your team internally, and just maybe some of the logistics in terms of maybe languages or serving different content, what that looks like. And I'm sure it's a little different for each of you, but how does the national and or global audience content strategy look like for you?
For UFC, the global strategy it's huge. Most of the fighters are from other countries. They're not from the US. So for UFC, we have social media pages in multiple languages for multiple countries. So we have UFC for like China, New Zealand, South America, just all over the world. I don't know the exact number. I should have memorized that before, but it's very important that we have our fans taken care of because they are so international. We also have a performance institute set up in our Shanghai location. So we have a huge following in Asia, just because like mixed martial arts started out there with like the Pride series and the K1 fights that they used to have there. So having it just international is super important to us. So we try to make sure, even with our fans, that they're taken care of. So for example, we did Fight Island because a lot of the fighters are international, so they couldn't get into the US to fight. So if we did it in Fight Island, a lot of them were able to get the visas to come there. So that was our way of making sure that all of our fighters and our fans were, able to see the fights. Yeah.
At the USL, our content's predominantly in English language. We do have, or have had about a dozen games on ESPN Deportes this year. And so we have done Spanish language broadcasts and radio for those events. It's something we need to dive into more, and we really need to represent the Hispanic audience in the market better in our content. So that's on the roadmap as we try and tune into that audience. For content strategy, we look at our distribution a little bit differently in terms of our breadth of athletes. So we've got athletes from over 70 different countries in the USL. So what we try and do is, even though they're not huge names and they're not necessarily celebrity players in the US, they do have a lot of significance and relevance in their home country. So what we do is we work with our athletes and our clubs to build out distribution networks to certain regions of the world. So right now we're working with about 50 Caribbean players in our league, and we're sending them game-specific highlights of just their action and just their goals. And then we're sending those to them over social media, and then they're reposting to amplify the USL message to their fans and audience. And we've done some case studies, and we were seeing like 10x return on engagement to an athlete that's got 2,000 social media followers versus, USL that has 100,000. We just don't get the engagement. So we're seeing a lot of success there, and we kind of need to continue to build that out to European players and into Canada and work that through. But we've had a big emphasis in the Caribbean right now.
That actually is something that we are really shifting to focus in, specifically the Caribbean right now, because we will be the first USA Games that's invited the Caribbean programs to be a part of the USA Games. So there hasn't been a roadmap or a framework for how to handle different languages, both leading up to. So how are we pushing out content to those athletes and their supporters? And then also during event, having translators and people here to support those athletes. We're able to lean a lot on the planning of World Games. So Special Olympics has the World Games also every 2 years, alternating summer and winter. So we're just getting into that and kind of figuring out how we're going to utilize technology to communicate with those athletes leading up to the games, and also understanding that sometimes communication is hard just because of their resources in their Caribbean islands. So we have a lot more to learn about that, and are just kind of diving into it at this point.
I want you guys to explain or talk about if they're trying to get experience into this space, and this is activation, digital tech, content strategy space, and Meg, you probably know about this as being a UCF grad, right? What suggestions, what advice would you give them for getting the experience that you guys have now in this space, in this ever-changing content area?
Well, I think since it's a little harder to be hands-on and in person right now, I think following events like this, watching as many webinars as possible, reading as many articles about sponsorship or sports tech. I follow some really great ones like the sponsorship space on LinkedIn, which is amazing. They post so many great stats and just informational things. And just joining other sports organizations. So there's like Women in Sports Entertainment or Sports and Events. It's called WISE. So they have branches all over the US. And yeah, I think just joining those types of things right now as students, asking if you can be interns, any type of thing like that, where you can get just to be able to be connected to other people in the sport would be great. I feel like a lot of it is also very much you learn on the job. So if you can just get in that space and intern or just shadow someone, I think that's the best way to start.
And to piggyback on what Tiffany said, I'm also a member of WISE, the Tampa Bay chapter. Joining up for networking groups and people that specialize in what you do is an awesome opportunity just to connect with like-minded people, right? And people that look like you and are doing what you want to do. I think one of the other great things about the pandemic is a lot of conferences are free now. It was last year, like there were conferences that were $600-700 to attend, and it just never made sense to do. But now everyone's desperate for participation in these conferences and attendees because they have sponsors to fulfill. So now there's a lot of free content that's out there. So sign up for everything, and even if you don't make it to all of it, you get the recorded webinar on tap and you can watch it later on. So I think that's pretty huge too.
And I think piggybacking on what both Tiffany and Lizzie just mentioned, and Tiffany and I were just speaking about this yesterday, that there seems to be just the channels of content sharing and idea sharing have just spread wide open during this pandemic because everybody had to be more creative and innovative. So in companies and organizations within an industry that might kind of just stay in their lane normally just started collaborating and sharing content across social media platforms in a way that I've never seen before. So I think absorbing as much of that as the students can, just to be educated and learn what the possibilities are, I think right now is really an important thing to do. And then also once events start happening again, I know from working for a nonprofit and working in events for 7 years now, every event needs volunteers, even not an event even if it's a for-profit company event. And volunteering sometimes is a way to kind of see the operations behind the scenes and understand what's happening and know what the possibilities are for careers within that organization or industry. So it's just kind of raising your hand and saying, I want to learn more and help can go a really long way in just your education, but also in your networking and knowing people in the industry.
My last question would be, who are some of the leaders in the space, whether that's sports, technology, media? Who do you look at when you're looking for either inspiration or just somebody that sticks out, an organization or person, whatever you decide, as somebody that's a leader and kind of somebody that you look to?
Some of the leaders that I think that stick out, and I will say Dana White for UFC, just because of how he handled returning back to sports during this pandemic. He actually really cared about his employees and the athletes, but he also wanted to make sure that the fans had something to watch. So I felt like he handled that very, very well. And I also feel like Adam Silver with the NBA, I thought he also handled this pandemic very well. And I just think he's handled a lot of other social issues and those types of things very well this past year as well.
For me, similar to Tiffany, I look to the NBA on the technology front and their innovation, right? And they're always first to try out new things. So it's always good to keep an eye on them and learn from them. They test things out and sometimes they don't work and sometimes they go big. But it's always good to keep an eye on them. And then with that, the WNBA too, I think they've both been very progressive in social injustice this year. And I think they've been a good role model and a good blueprint for the sports entities to follow. So they get a pat on the back for that. And then when it comes to using athletes, I think you got to look at the WWE and how they've made their athletes central to their brand. I think UFC's done a great job of that too. But how you leverage them to build personalities and characters that gets fans to care about the sport and your competition.
And I think I'm going to sound like an echo here, but also very focused on how the NBA is handling everything right now. And selfishly, because as I mentioned before, they're using the venue that we're going to be using. So obviously they have their resources are a little bit different than those of our event, but we're really getting a lot of ideas about how they're using spaces, how they're using technology. As an example, we will have to build or find a solution for laundry facilities for our athletes while they're here, because they'll be staying in hotels. Typically at previous games, they're in dorm rooms, which are prepared to support students doing laundry all the time. Hotels, not so much. And we were really, trying to find good solutions. And the NBA came into Wide World of Sports, took a batting cage that the Braves used to use and turned it into a 66 machine laundry facility. Did the plumbing, brought in the water heaters, something that we would have never considered, and they're doing it in the space that we're going to be in a couple of years. So really focused on how they're innovating right now. And then to Lizzie's point, also the WWE, they're a partner of Special Olympics and just a marketing giant in how they utilize their athletes and keep their fans engaged digitally all the time, but specifically right now. So that's sort of who we're looking to help guide us over the next 20 months.
Yeah, it's really neat to hear the stories of just all the little intricacies and things that happen and stuff you never think about, like laundry and a batting cage, how that comes together. Yeah. So, one of the traditions that we have to close out the podcast is we like to ask each of our speakers just to look right in the camera and share some words of advice for students. This could be more personal. It doesn't have to be necessarily about your organization or your role, but what's something that you would want them to carry with them in their career? So we'll start with Tiffany and then we'll end from there.
Oh, this is a loaded one. I think the best thing you can do is not to give up. I know getting into sports can be very hard, but just find any way in that you can. So you don't need to work for a sports league to get into sports. You can work for an orange juice company who sponsors the NBA or the WNBA, and that can be your way in. So just if you can't find the league that you want to work for, find your way in through the back door. I think that's the best advice I can get. And just make sure that your skills are, at the top of their game. So if you want to work in marketing, make sure you know all of the latest marketing techniques, because those skills transfer across all industries. So finance, finance, sports, just anything. So I think just staying on top of your skills and staying on top of all of the current news regarding your industry, I think it will really carry you far. And also network. That's the biggest thing I can say with sports. I think networking is your key to get your foot in the door at a lot of places. So just make sure you're attending these types of events if they're live, at the speakers, if you see them on social media or LinkedIn, those types of things. And once we get back to in-person events, go to those events. Even if you don't think you're at that level, go meet people, say hello, get your face seen, just get your foot in the door. So that's my best advice I can give.
I think Tiffany gave all the best advice, but just to echo that, hard work and being smart gets you far, right? It can get you really far, but it won't get you all the way. So think about networking and the relationships you're building and people who you're working with today or who are in your class today, and keeping those relationships ongoing as you all go your separate ways once you graduate, because there's going to be a time one day where you get a phone call and an ex-classmate that offers you a job or your first shot into a space you want to do. And so the larger your network is, the more you can use it to your advantage and learn a lot and get your foot in the door at the right place. But I think I underestimated that in my career. I really relied on hard work and being smart and trying new things. And that's got me to a certain point. But now it's looking at, who's in my network that can help me get to the next level, right? And who can I learn from? So don't be afraid to reach out to strangers on LinkedIn and just, give them a compliment that you admire their work and just want to learn more about what they're doing. People in sports are super willing to share their experiences with you. So you've got nothing to lose at this point.
And I think the advice that I would give first is, if you're going to work in sports, make sure you're in a role, whether it be the specific role, the organization, the company, that you're passionate about, because sports comes with a lot of nights, a lot of weekends and long hours. And if you're not really passionate about what you're doing, it's going to quickly become less enjoyable than you had originally expected. And then the other part of it is a focus on networking, as the other ladies mentioned, but also really making sure that you're being kind as you're networking. A lot of times people are told network, and they're kind of just flying through people at a networking event, like to check off boxes of people they've met. But it's really spending the time in maybe 30 seconds, actually starting to develop a relationship with that person. Be kind, and they'll remember you more than they would if you just introduced yourself, gave a business card, and moved on. So I think that kindness and passion go a really long way. And then to echo Lizzie's comments about hard work, it's always about doing a little bit more, than is expected of you. So doing your job really, really well, and then finding a way every single day to do something that isn't written in your job description, that you're not expected to do, and also doing that small thing really well, and you'll be pretty successful.
And I want to add to just what Megan said. Networking isn't about you and growing your network, right? The kindness and compassion, it's about what can you do for that person, right? If you want them to remember you and think positive of you, it can't always be you asking, right? So if you're working through this checklist of I need to meet these 50 people at a conference and pass on a business card, like that's not relationship building. So you really have to get to know those people. There are quick and efficient ways to do that, but it's about long-term relationships.
And that's a wrap. Join us next episode to talk tennis and performance data with former CEO of the WTA and current president of UTR, Ann Worcester, with former pro tennis player and current head coach of the New York Empire, Luke Jensen, and also pro coach, Sandy Middleman from Middleman Tennis.